never sleeps, pal.
Welcome to Money Never Sleeps, a podcast that looks inside the head of entrepreneurs and at what makes them do what they do. A wise person once said, "The world is more malleable than you think, and it's just waiting for you to hammer it into shape." We talk to entrepreneurs doing just that and try to find out why. This is Pete Townsend, and welcome to our 12th episode of Money Never Sleeps, a podcast kindly sponsored by Top Tier Recruitment, who are a specialist recruitment consultancy in fintech and financial services. In this episode, we talk to Enda Leahy, founder and CEO of Courtsdesk, a legal intelligence platform for global markets. Somewhere between trying to get himself embedded as a journalist in Iraq and getting frustrated with a lack of quality data to do his job as a newspaper editor, Enda realized he needed a bit more excitement in his life. Hell-bent on solving a problem worth solving that he had first-hand experience with, Enda launched Courtsdesk in 2015. Listen in as he tells his story. On with the show. Here we go again. Welcome to the 12th episode of Money Never Sleeps. We're here in the offices of Top Tier Recruitment in Dublin. I'm Pete Townsend.
And I'm Owen Fitzgerald.
We're here with Enda Leahy, CEO of Courtsdesk. Welcome to the show, Enda.
Thank you very much.
Awesome to have you here. Thanks for coming.
Good to be here.
So this is our first time meeting Enda. You and Owen obviously know each other from a few other things. But just for the listeners, for me even, just start by telling us about yourself and about Courtsdesk and about your journey to get to this point.
Rock and roll. Good to be here. My background was originally in journalism, actually. So I worked in newspapers, first in London at the Sunday Times on the foreign desk, doing foreign news. And then at the Sunday Times here in Ireland, and then became deputy editor of the Mail on Sunday for my sins, where we did a lot of, it was always Sunday newspaper journalism, always investigative journalism. So one becomes very accustomed to using different data sets to validate your research, so to prove the identity of people, very close to corporate due diligence, effectively, all very similar data sets. But one big missing part of the picture when one was trying to do any assessment on a company or a person or a politician, whoever it might be, was the courts. Very difficult to search the courts. And pretty much, even including America, but in America, courts information is much more readily accessible. But almost everywhere in the world, the same kind of problem applies. So we started off with the concept of a newswire covering the courts, a kind of a digital platform for aggregating reports by human beings in courtrooms. But later, we kind of pared it back to just starting with a pure data product. And so we started aggregating information from the courts in Ireland. And we have to date signed most of the top 5 law firms, one outstanding, a whole bunch of other ones too. Started into very large audit firms, banks, and eventually we'll be a pure API business before we ever start with reporters in the courtroom. So yeah, it's been an interesting roller coaster, but so far so good.
Wow. So I mean, what did things look like beforehand? What it reminds me of is my mom is a genealogy buff, and she's been trying to trace the whole family history back to Ireland from Boston and Newport, Rhode Island, and through the years. And what she said was that because most of the records were destroyed, the central records were destroyed in 1916, that all that's left really are church records. So going through these big old church books of baptisms, of weddings, of deaths, of everything to try to figure out what's what. Now, I'm assuming that before you came along, the Irish court system was a bit more modernized than that, right?
Yeah.
But what did it look like beforehand, and how have you changed that?
Well, so for example, if you look at just the National Court Service itself does not have a database of circuit court registers.
Okay.
So in fact, what they have is each one of the circuits. These are regional, local clusters of courts around the country. Each one of them maintains their own database. So we are the first people to aggregate the information from each one of these regional courts and put them into our own database. So we run entity recognition and search and indexing across those. But, for example, there is nobody in the National Court Service offices in Dublin who has access to a central database of all circuit court listings, and we do. So there's a kind of an irony in that we're doing, taking the very limited pieces of information that they publish and still building something better than they've managed to do, even though they have the information themselves. And really, the reason for that primarily is underfunding. They've been desperately had desperate budget cuts over the last 10 years, and they are trying to improve that. But yeah, just because it gives you an idea of how it's been.
It's crazy because I've seen and I saw it when they passed the act last year, I think, around unmarried parents and unmarried fathers getting guardianship access from when the child is born and stuff. But they were advising people that there's no register for that. If you've been granted a court order in relation to access or anything in family law, that you need to hold on to it somewhere safe.
Yeah,
in case you ever need it.
Yeah, exactly the same. I mean, there's a lot of talk about using blockchain to improve how wills and wills are stored. Because same thing, you can move a house 5 times, go to a local solicitor in each town, register a will in each place. Nobody has any record of which one is the priority one. So yeah, there's a lot of that, and the court system is absolutely full of paper and full of very badly entered data, because you have people who are using systems that aren't designed for checking names before they go in. So the spelling errors that we find is just complete gobbledygook. I've been looking for bank spelled as bonk, but I haven't yet found it.
You've learned,
but we found Banak a few times.
Yeah. Okay. And when you made the leap out of the Irish Mail on Sunday and into the entrepreneurial world, what was a trigger for that, and how did it feel?
I'd done an MBA and I was working on the concept for quite a while, and Enterprise Ireland had backed us with a feasibility study already, which was huge because it gave me the ability to go and hire some engineers to do a proof of concept. So it turned out that what they built, I'd never managed an IT project before, so what they built had to be binned when the CTO came along, who actually knew what he was doing. I was lucky enough that there was a redundancy round, so I could walk out with enough money in my pocket to guarantee the CTO some initial money, live off that for a while. So that was the kind of the specific timing trigger. It's very hard, I think, to leave a job with a regular income, and it's very difficult to run a new startup that has any ambition if you can't do it full time. So I was lucky. Good. And I saw as well that you went into the Techstars program. Yeah, so we were the first Irish company to get into the FinTech Techstars program. Yep. So I had 600 applicants that year, I think. We got down to the final 10. So yeah, we were chuffed. We were really, really, and it's amazing. I mean, the Techstars network, they say when you join that, they say it's Techstars for life. And really that's been thoroughly borne out. The network that they have, they've built their own social media platform for CEOs and founders of companies, and the network of investors and mentors and the support that you get, the perks that you get. So, I mean, we got $100,000 worth of Amazon credits. It was nice for our first year, and so on. It's really impressive, and it's been great to date. Good. I saw Martin Cass listed there as on your advisory board. Shout out to Martin. I know he's a loyal listener. Yeah, Martin's been fantastic, and I mean, it was him that got us into the whole idea of Techstars in the first place. He turned up at he was at an investor pitch that I was at, and he was the first person out of the room to come over to shake my hand, and he said, "Sorry, don't get your hopes up. I'm not investing." I was like, "Ah, damn." Yeah. But he said, "Look, I'm really interested in what you're doing. Stay in touch." And then when the next application cohort came up, he kind of gave us a kick and said, "Right, come on." And was the program itself, was that mostly connectivity out to the market and to network and to investors, or did they bring you through some educational programs as well in terms of running a business? Both, yeah. So 12 weeks. The first 2.5 weeks are what they call mentor madness. So you got about 100 mentors who come in, and you do 20-minute back-to-back sessions with them. So effectively, you're having to explain your concept, explain your business and traction to date, listen to what they can do for you, and then try and reach some kind of an agreement on that. And then bang, start all over again every day for 10 days. So it's pretty hectic. Okay. But you do meet people. I met a couple of people who managed literally trillions of dollars. I met a deputy director of the UK Cabinet Office. I met really senior lawyers, financiers, you name it. It's proper, amazing network. Then they have weekly sessions every week with the MD of the program, and he invariably has some sector knowledge of most of the companies. He's been a very diverse career. And he really drills into and kind of slaps your business model around and challenges your assumptions and so on. And then, there are lots of things, seminars on how to raise equity, how to manage the legals of that, how to do BD. They have speakers come in from non-mentors, but other speakers come in to talk about sales and marketing, digital marketing, analytics around that, and so on. That's just a sample. I mean, that was 2 or 3 of the 10 weeks. Just there, but it's full on, and they really make you work for it. I was warned by one of the Irish guys. He did a different Techstars program. He said, if you come in late, they'll kick your ass. But
oh, really?
But I mean, it never happened really. But it was really full on. They make you work for it.
And was there much? I suppose, was there a lot of convincing? Did people kind of see the idea and the concept straight away? Like, it sounds simple, and I get it straight away, but at the same time, that doesn't necessarily always make it an investable idea.
Yeah, well, being an investable idea is not necessarily the same thing as being a successful business idea. In fact, I think the two are very different. And of course, there are different types of investors. So most of the funds, I think, take a lot of proving. They take a lot of proof in terms of your commercial attraction. Angels are, much more supportive, but often take a lot of time, and they're quite disorganized. So angel networks are very difficult to deal with, in my experience. So you got to get lucky, really, and find somebody who has some interest, some expertise, or some knowledge, and then you become an investable business. Very different thing to what people in accelerators or people in other kind of sectors would think. I guess what we do, we have a lot of very diverse use cases. So we're going into different pitches talking about radically different uses for exactly the same data. So it could be one thing could be news. So we have a newswire. So every single national news organization almost in Ireland uses us already. And we can see stories every single day from our newswire, as we call it. But then if you look at very, very large-scale litigation analysis, you can look at business development for law firms, so understanding transparency of the market for law firms, so whose clients, who are moving from one law firm to another, right up the way into very kind of large macro analysis of banks, for example. So banks have very large litigation footprint across multiple tiers of the courts. So, and of course, each bank is a group of companies. So you could have 80 or 90 companies in a group, like in the AIB group. I think there are 90 companies or so. Each one of those has its own different litigation footprint. So to do a kind of a proper due diligence, you can now do a very kind of slick data profile based on their litigation track record and their patterns of behavior in that way. So yeah, it's interesting, the various use cases that you have, but trying to convince people that there's a valid commercial investable opportunity there gets tricky, because the first thing they come back and say is, okay, well, show me how much money you've made already. Which is hard when you're a startup.
How much have you put into it?
And then the separate thing is, okay, we don't have faith that you can do all of these things you're going to say. And you're like, well, okay, get lost. I'm talking to somebody who does believe it, because we've executed on every single thing we've done so far.
Beyond the Techstars investment, you've had other support, other funding?
Yeah, so we have two. We have some Irish angel investors who have been absolutely incredibly supportive. They topped up after their first investment, which is 2 years ago. None of them kind of sector specialists in what we do. We've got some guys who are aviation engineers, a whole team, a management team of an aviation avionics company. But, like in most businesses, at the end of the day, it boils down to, have you got fundamental internal processes that can manage how the business is structured? Have you got a functioning sales pipeline that is reportable, that is, definable, that you can rely on? Have you got processes in onboarding clients and, customer support and so on and so forth? So there's a lot of very similar things across any type of services business. So, and separately then we picked up some amazing investors in London in and around the Techstars. So Techstars, they do $100,000 and a $20,000 investment. But no, we got some incredible guys. We got the just recently stepped down, but he was the chief executive of the British Bankers Association.
Yeah.
So that's the representative body for all the C-suite executives of banks, liaising with Cabinet about financial policy. He's now the chairman of the UK Government Regulatory Policy Committee, Anthony Brown. We've got the former head of SME banking at Lloyd's. We got a lady who used to manage a $2.5 billion debt investment fund. So yeah, picked up some pretty impressive characters through London. So we've got an amazing advisory board, and we're lucky.
Very good.
And I suppose, stepping back from that, you think where you're at now, and it just somewhat tie back to kind of storytelling, because it's all been around journalism, and what got you into that in the first place?
Yeah.
And has it flown in? It seems to kind of follow on into what you're doing now. It's around identifying a story. You talk about investigative journalism. That's kind of what you're doing by bringing out all of the information that people don't see and being able to put it all together. Is that just something that you've always been driven to be involved in?
Yeah, I guess I was always interested in. I think every journalist gets into journalism, certainly news journalists anyway, to try and expose or improve society by improving information access around things that one feels should be more readily understandable. So that could be whatever, politicians' expenses, or it could be the functionings of banks,
who they hang out with,
and so on and so forth. Right? Yeah, and there are lines to be walked in terms of defamation and what's appropriate in terms of investigative techniques and so on. And so I think there's a whole school of doing that properly, and you can't, and it's a tragedy what's happening to the news industry at the moment. The whole debate about fake news, which itself is a useless term for understanding what the concept of it is. The whole undermining of news organizations and by finding underfunding and so on. Tricky. It's all very tricky.
What would you be doing right now if you were working for CNN?
I've been doing what I'm doing already. So,
okay.
So trying to find and improve the model, the business model. So, we have a business model that we don't think has existed anywhere on earth for doing journalism, for incentivizing and for paying for journalism. And really that boils down to, at its core, maintaining the standards of how information is captured, improving the management of the information that is then captured in order to use it for different markets. So without compromising the core of what your purpose is, which is objectively and accurately capture information, at the same time, that information, if accurately captured, can be used in a whole variety of different circumstances. So if you think about the courts, the way we would discuss it is we would say that the courts are the most fundamental forum for arbitration of dispute, be that criminal or civil in society. And yet, it's very difficult to use that information or get that information. But at its core, it is the most fundamental forum for any kind of risk assessment, due diligence assessment, or understanding of where society is as a functioning society. So of course there are going to be dozens and dozens and dozens of different verticals in different markets that are going to be interested in accessing that information. So I think the whole putting journalism into data is a relatively unusual thing. You have the likes of, I guess, maybe Storyful, where it wasn't quite the same way, where the data itself was the component, but a digital at its core philosophy around what they were trying to do. So Mark pulled off some amazing things in his time there. Mark Little, but yeah, I don't think there are enough innovations in journalism at all.
Okay. So do you think you found that parallel between the pleasure and passion that you put into editing and or writing a good news story and now driving this business forward?
Yeah, look, I guess there are different things, right? And very different challenges, because I think when you're managing a company and you have staff that have children and mortgages, the responsibility is very different than when you're working for a big organization that just has a budget. So that's one thing. Separately then, from the specific kind of challenges around, gathering the news and feeling really passionate about, we're going to get this across the line, we're going to expose this, we're going to find this stuff out. And itself, it's a kind of a game of how you get the information. Somebody says, you can't have that information, that's a red rag to a bull for me. I'm like, okay, but that's not going to happen. I'm going to find this out one way or another. So yeah, and managing teams of journalists around that which I did for 8 or 9 years, was really good fun, because the more creatively you can think around how to, find a different path to that piece of information, the more interesting and fun it is, right? So I guess, but in terms of business, it's slightly different, because what you're doing is you're finding new uses for things that you know about already. So for us, it's really exciting to be told when we're not doing something right by a client, because we're like, okay, well, sorry, tell us how we should do it, right? And then a light bulb moment happens, and you go, okay, all right, I get it. And it's really, unless you literally go in and sit down and, when you've got an entirely new product, we're literally creating the market for this kind of information. So even they don't know how to use it, but they do know what they do. And it's very difficult to know what a client actually does in their day-to-day life, because even within law firms, they will have different processes, from firm to firm. So you can't go in and sit with them all day, every day. So you've got to have a dialogue that gets that input loop, that feedback loop going. That's fun. That's really exciting.
No, I get that.
And is there a pushback, I suppose, on that transparency? Because, having that information out there can then point to the decisions being made by the courts, which is not always available, and you can't necessarily hold judges or courts accountable for their decisions, especially where they might have two similar cases where they have a vastly different, judgment or whatever. So, is there a pushback, I suppose, even from the court side of things, or I don't know who?
No, it's the opposite actually. I think the court, the judiciary in particular, are very keen to have better access to information about the courts. I mean, just the other day, in fact, the court service last week, they instituted a new protocol for allowing journalists to access documents that are open in court, which is the first time it's ever happened in Ireland. That's huge, absolutely huge. I mean, I emailed them immediately to say, congratulations, this is brilliant, this is huge. So no, I think there's a big push to get information, and it depends on what it is. Obviously, every bureaucracy has a sensitivity around, perceptions of weakness that they don't want, people come, sticking their noses in at every opportunity. That's perfectly natural. But I think in principle, we're pushing on an open door. Similarly in the UK, I mean, we've had a great working engagement with the Ministry of Justice, who are responsible for all the various databases for the courts, and they're very keen for us to do what we're talking about doing. In fact, they said, when you do it, can we use your search engine rather than ours, because it's going to be better than ours, which is quite fun. So no, I don't think, on the other side of it, I guess law firms have been operating with fairly large, very high degree of opacity. It's been a fairly opaque market. Kind of difficult to know, what one law firm charges relative to another. We can't really help with that, but the other side of it is who works for whom, what lawyer represents what clients, and so on. So yeah, I think law firms are they can see the opportunity, and they're a little bit wary at the same time of recognizing that for the first time anybody can search through their litigation clients very easily. So we've had a couple of people go, but hold on, so then I could do the same thing for this other competitor firm over here? And I said, yeah. They go, oh, okay, well, okay, right. So it's just a new world,
That's the thing. And I've seen this with other fintechs that I've worked with. And I wouldn't say you guys are clearly a fintech. You're kind of just is legal tech a thing?
It is,
yeah. But there's so many more uses of it that it seems just putting it in that niche just seems unjustified, right? Yeah. But Circuit, who are a fintech that I work with, they collect data through audit firms who are their clients. And the data that they house on their system clearly belongs to the auditors. But some people who have said, well, that data now is suddenly available, that means, Jesus, there's some data security issue going on there. And it's like, well, how can my client's data be on your system? It's like, well, it's the auditor's data, and they pay us to put it on there. And it's almost kind of a parallel to what you're doing. This is the court's data, and that's public record, right? Mm-hmm. And it's just, you have a place where it's stored digitally. So how can people fight that and say, don't make that available? I mean, it's.
Yeah, I mean, there's no expectation of any right to privacy around courts' data. I mean, effectively, it's in the Constitution that, justice must be done and open, in the Irish Constitution. And in most legal systems, it's the same. So, no, I mean, there are no particular data protection issues. I mean, there's a difference between being able to access and search publicly available information and then what you do with it. That's slightly different. And under GDPR, there are fairly onerous restrictions around, for example, in marketing in particular, has always been a sensitive area, and criminal data is extremely sensitive information. So it's how one makes decisions about that. So that's an interesting area for data protection law reform, I guess. But no, there are certainly no issues around privacy per se.
Just to make an observation, it seems like you have two of the traits that make any entrepreneur successful. One being self-confidence, that's kind of coming out, but also humility, right? And not necessarily self-doubt, but definitely humility in there. The self-confidence makes it sound easy, as if this experience has been easy for you. I'm sure it hasn't been easy, though. What have been some of the hard things that you've had to do, the hard decisions you've had to make as you've gone through this?
Yeah, it is hard. It really is. Nobody should ever listen to any CEO that says, "Oh, this is a cakewalk." I think it's very rare to see any kind of a tech startup get off the ground without difficulties. So, what have been the hard things? I mean, financing is hard. It's really hard. I mean, and then early sales. So, when you start, I had this, incredible belief that everybody's going to think this is so obviously useful. Yeah. They're going to be, climbing over each other to give me money for this. What a fool I was.
Been there, done that. Yeah.
So that's one thing. Persuading people to part with money is never easy, be it investors or clients. So it took us about a year longer than we thought to make the first big enterprise level sales that we thought we would have made. And I guess part of that was because we made decisions about the product that we kind of wanted it to be perfect rather than going out with an MVP. There's no such thing as a perfect product, but you can prevaricate and delay and launch late against launching something that is useful early.
Yeah.
So those are a couple of the mistakes that we made. And then in terms of financing, there are stages like in any kind of, we all know about kind of pre-seed, seed, and then, Series A and onwards. But even within that pre-seed, seed and Series A, there are multiple kind of little, I was joking about it, but the valley of death, the financial valley of death, where your investment money comes in. And believe me, I don't think it's possible to start a tech startup without some kind of investment finance. So that's an initial challenge for anybody who's never done that before. So your finance comes in, and then the available cash at bank starts dropping, and then the sales revenue line should be starting, fairly shortly after that. But where the money dropping and the sales increasing, where those two lines bisect is usually a dip. And being in the middle of that dip, the financial valley of death is a really, really difficult place where hard decisions have to get made. You want to hire more people because you think that will accelerate the business, accelerate the sales. You can't do that. And sometimes you have to think about the people that you have and whether you can keep them or not and justify that expenditure. And those are long nights, and there have been a lot of days where I've woken up at 5 a.m. and just thought, well, I can't lie in bed. I have to get up because I'm just going to fry my brain sitting here at 5 a.m. panicking about this stuff. I'd rather be doing something about it. But no, I've never lost the belief that it would work. So you do have to get up and keep going,
Yeah.
So it's hard. It can be hard.
And I suppose then, following on for that, what have you found from your own personality that has helped or hindered, I suppose, the journey to this point?
Yeah, I think that initial kind of maybe, I don't know if it's overconfidence or whatever, but that assumption that it's all going to work, that is, I think that I could probably have done with a few slaps in the face and a bit more of a kick.
Well,
and they asked to say, look, you better be afraid. If this goes wrong, just like it's not going to be good.
Well, you mentioned before we started, you almost went to Iraq, right? On a news thing. So the assumption that it's all going to work out just fine, right?
Yeah, exactly. No. Well, I wanted to be war correspondent. I was offered a place with a guy who had some strings, as we call them, some financial deals with newspapers. So I was going to move to Iraq until my boss sat me down and said, look, you'll either be decapitated or kidnapped, and we don't want to see your head chopped off because we like you, and we don't want to pay you ransom, and nobody else is going to pay it. So you're not going. So maybe I was a bit overconfident about that. But so that's one thing, I guess. And I guess the other thing is I'd never done sales. And sales is not just an art, but it's a process. And learning the art is one thing and learning the process is a different thing. And you have to do both. And you just have to be rigorous and systematic about it.
Yeah, there's a good kind of crazy in there that works as well. Like I've worked with some crazy salespeople in my day that initially I was like, they're crazy. I'm not working with them, but you want that crazy on your team. It's like a few good men, you want me on that wall. You need me on that wall. A guy I used to work with, he would just basically stalk prospects by hanging out in coffee shops near their office, and he'd wait for them to walk outside. And he'd just go to pretend to bump into them. Yeah. Now, I won't mention this guy's name. There's also a history of him with a long story. I won't even get into it with my friend's dog, but it's another story for another time, guys. But no, I mean, it is hard. And like you say, when you have that assumption that what you've got is something that everybody wants, how do you devise a sales pitch that actually someone's going to hook into and say, yes, actually, I do want that. You are solving a problem for me, and I will give you my money.
Yeah.
Yeah,
well, we did all the common things of going around talking about the features that we developed rather than the problems that we were solving.
Exactly.
So that took a really, quite a lot longer than it should have to just really become an ingrained fact. And then, of course, really, as time goes on, the product starts selling itself. And so you start getting referrals from existing clients onto others. And that then is really exciting, where you're finding new value propositions every day without even having to try, only just by talking to people and coming in and doing demos and people asking interesting questions. And that's the big, always those moments where somebody at the back of the room puts their hand up and asks a question. So, it usually starts with, this might sound silly, but, and then they give you this absolutely brilliant, nailed on new idea for something genius. And it's like, oh, I love you. Great. So there's a lot of that. But no, I mean, look, we're at the stage now where we have inbound client requests, sales requests. Had one this morning from a relatively decent sized firm, which is great. So I think we're at the stage now where I think it's getting that piece of getting the product and the proposition and explanation of the proposition well defined, then communicating it, and communicating it isn't just directly, but also by societal osmosis, the news media, Twitter, Facebook, social media, referrals on LinkedIn, whatever it might be. There are so many channels now that you have to be thinking about, and just the amount of time it takes to try and manage all that and come up with the content for all that. And in our company, it's always been primarily just me doing all of this. So the finance raising, the sales, the social media, the news media, everything except for the engineering. So yeah, I mean, it's just there's only so many hours in the day, right?
And have you found it hard then handing it over? Because we talked on the show a number of times to people about how when they've built something that's almost entirely theirs, then being able to pass it on or get someone to take some responsibility on other parts of it.
I'd love to have more people to hand it over to, frankly. No, look, I think there's a difficulty in finding trust for that. But I think there comes a point where at the very early stages for any product that anybody is developing, it's very much defined by them, and it's kind of in their heads, and the whole you get into this kind of crystallized, easily communicatable value proposition is tricky at the beginning. But over time, you should have enough client engagement that you can talk about fairly standardized problems that clients have that you can solve, and then you have a proposition that anybody that has got some intelligence and social skills should be able to communicate.
Yeah. Because
you've got a play sheet for them to play off, So yeah, then it's just a case of can you trust these people to go out and do my first ever management role when I got my first job as a news editor at the Mail on Sunday. My then boss I said, okay, I've never been a manager. I don't know what the hell I have to do. And he goes, no, it's simple. Just don't do anything stupid. Oh, that's great. Thanks a million. So
yeah,
there's an element to that.
I know. I've listened to one of the speakers at Dogpatch Labs First Fridays that they had a couple of years ago, where they get speakers, mentors, advisors up just to share their stories. And one of them said, sure, you can operationalize anything, right? And that you can operationalize the sales process and break it down into 10 different steps and get someone to follow those 10 steps. And of course, we've got something out there now called DevOps, right? It's operationalizing development. That you could break it down into these components. Do you see anything new on the horizon based upon your experience with getting everything this far as you've gotten it, to say you've learned some pretty good lessons here that you're sharing with others that make sense?
How do you mean that? Sorry,
just in terms of the running a business with running a new business, and that you're taking on a lot of clients, you're growing quickly, you've got some good funding in, you want to take it to the next level, and there's going to be some things that you have to do, and there's some things you've already done that you've seen have been successul in pushing things along. Anything that you think is worthwhile sharing?
Oh, I see.
If you had a pulpit?
Yeah. Yeah, look, I mean, the first thing that I tell because I've ended up kind of accidentally mentoring a few other entrepreneurs coming through, particularly into Techstars. So just because I've been there, and so people often come to me to look for advice around how to get in and so on. First thing I always say is just make sales fast. Like and I mean, it sounds stupid and sounds obvious, but so often, and I did it, you just think, get the product really cool, and then it'll be easy. No way. Get in the door and just make if the sale is a €5 note, as a thank you for coming in, if it's a cup of coffee, it's better, get that sale into your bank account. Get an acknowledgement that you are working on something that people should pay for. That is fundamental, and it's critical to your own psychological survival as well. I mean, you can go along and eventually think you're some kind of artist, you're creating some kind of cool, beautiful thing that somebody's going to pay Picasso money for. No, you're building products that people are going to buy, and if they're not going to buy them, then it's something desperately wrong. And rather than thinking it's just because we haven't done this or it's just because we haven't done that, no, go out and find what you're doing right or wrong. So that's the number one thing. And so, one of the other startups has just gone into Techstars, Jennifer Othello, brilliant startup, great idea. And when I was talking to her, I was saying, look, when you go into that final presentation to all of these executives in Barclays, here's what you say. You say, you've got 10 or 20 other different companies that are coming in here applying, and all of them are going to have to build and do this, that, and the other. But I'm telling you, I could do 10 proofs of concept with my fully operational business tomorrow. We could be turning, transactions tomorrow, literally tomorrow. And that is the differentiator between where she had gotten to. And that's huge. I mean, it took us over a year and a half to make our first sale. So, and that's hard for everybody involved. Investors, for the staff, for yourself, all of that. So that's the number one thing, I think, is never lose sight of that first sale.
Yeah. Who do you lean on? Sounds like you've got a lot under your control, but...
I got some great investors, and honestly, we've had a couple of rough times over the last few months, just in terms of, pipeline and kind of strategy. We're really trying hard to get into other jurisdictions now, which just takes resources that are hard to get when you don't have a huge finance round. So we're targeting around at the moment. But yeah, I mean, there was one day I had a fairly deep moment of blind panic, and I thought, what the hell am I going to do, you can't phone your mum,
Yeah.
That's not going to happen.
No.
So, although my mother has been a huge source of, backing and kind of support, as my father as well. But no, I phoned one of my investors, and he just said, okay, right, stop, here's what you do. And he'd been there, he'd seen other companies doing the same thing, blah, blah, blah. And he just took it from, panic stations to, here, let's sort this out in the next 24 hours. And we did. So,
there you go.
Great. Cool heads and knowledge and some network go a very, very, very long way, no matter what the situation is. But no matter how high pressure the problem is, panicking never, ever, ever helps. So got to keep a cool head and just phone people, and having a network around you. It could be other founders, but invariably founders have the same problems and not solutions.
Yeah.
So you're better off going to people who are more senior than you. And having those people in your phone book is vital. So, that's the other side of, making your first sale is one thing, building a deep network of people who understand and have been there, not in exactly the same way, but in relatively similar ways, huge, very important.
And who leans on you?
Who leans on me? I got 2 kids, so they lean on me a bit.
Yeah.
Or they jump up and down my head. Yeah, look, I mean, it's hard with any early stage business. It's hard to keep a regular income. So, keeping a family mortgage and all that stuff is quite hard.
Yeah.
And then, my staff, I got 3 guys working with me at the moment. I've had more and I've had less. And, you're there and you've got to answer the questions and there's no escaping it.
24/7.
Yeah, well, look, thankfully they don't phone me at 2 o'clock in the morning. But
You going on holiday this summer?
No holidays. Haven't had a holiday in about a year and a half.
Okay.
So whenever I either close the Series A or get our MRR up past 150k or something like that, then yeah, I'll take a holiday.
Okay.
Until then, the odd day off is the best you can get. So you need a little bit of downtime. But no.
Well, they say don't ever celebrate a series round or a funding round after you get it, because all that proves is that someone can cut you a check.
Yeah, I mean, there's a big problem with the whole attitude towards investing, and this again goes back to the sales. You're selling your business by taking investor money,
yeah,
and you're not selling your product.
Yeah,
and at the end of the day, if you get into business to sell your business, that's fine, but you're not going to sell your product if you're focused entirely on that, and you're going to spend too long not closing those deals, and then you won't have a saleable product or a saleable company anyway. No investor wants to invest in a company that doesn't make a profit.
Yep.
I mean, obviously. So, I would rather be selling my product than selling my company.
Okay. Listen, I think we've probably come to a natural end where we like to ask, well, what is my favourite question anyway, but what is it people wouldn't expect to know about you?
Don't know. I guess my best dinner table story is meeting Colonel Gaddafi with 20 models flying out in his private jet to meet him in his tent in Tripoli. That was fun. Random. I just answered the phone at the right time.
Who's this?
Me. So
Colonel Daffy?
Colonel Gaddafi.
Oh, Colonel Gaddafi.
Yeah.
Yeah, I got some connections to Libya. You don't want to hear those stories.
Yeah. So, it was good. I just answered the phone at the right time, and it turns out some guy was organising a beauty contest, and Gaddafi was going to host it. So I said, okay, great, so we'll cover it. So we did, and then I phoned up the organiser and said, okay, I'm going to come out, represent the paper and cover this thing. And he said, great, come to Paris. We're going to fly out on the leader's jet. So it was a converted 737 with like a bedroom and a sitting room and the whole thing. And and I had to fly out with these 20 models who were competing in this beauty contest. It was a bizarre week.
I bet. I bet.
Did tours all over, up and down to the Sahara, driving jeeps across the Sahara, and pretty incredible week.
Did you write a story about it?
Yeah, of course. Yeah. Well, the American girl who she didn't win, but he brought us all back, with me and a couple of journalists and her, and he named her as the first diplomatic representative of Libya to the United States in 21 years since they had burned down the American embassy in Tripoli. So he made her the honorary consul to Libya, or to America from Libya, this 19-year-old model from Texas. So we did a Sunday Times Magazine feature about her, 5 pages of hilarity.
I'll look it up.
It's good fun.
Available on Google now.
Yeah, I believe so.
Yeah, good.
Brilliant. Well, listen, thanks very much for having us on the show. I mean, fantastic story and a lot to learn and a lot to pass on for the listeners and other entrepreneurs.
Rock and roll. Thanks for having me.
Great. Thanks, Enda.
Thanks, Mel. Take care.
Thanks.
We'd like to thank Enda for opening up his mind for the 12th episode of Money Never Sleeps, a podcast brought to you by Owen Fitzgerald and me, Pete Townsend, and sponsored by Top Tier Recruitment. You can find out more about Enda and Courtsdesk on their website, courtsdesk.com. Please subscribe to Money Never Sleeps on SoundCloud or on iTunes and leave us a review. We love the feedback. Also, check out our website for more at moneyneversleeps.ie or drop us a line on info@moneyneversleeps.ie if you're an entrepreneur with a story to tell. We'd also like to thank the team at Create Sound for recording and editing this podcast, and thanks to Dogpatch Labs for their unwavering support of the startup community in Dublin. Till next time, thanks for listening. See ya!